Week in and week out, college football continues to entertain us. It's been an incredible season full of lots of exciting games, lots of exciting upsets, and we are going to get another week of some potential big games. Georgia and Texas will play in week 8, and it's a big game still. They obviously have gone down different paths. Georgia is obviously trying to still discover or rediscover the dominance that it once had, but they're still a very good football team. Texas is going to try to get to 7-0, and they are one of those teams that is considered one of the top teams in college football, maybe the best overall. Georgia comes into this game 5-1. Texas sits at 6-0. Now, these are two teams that expected to score a lot of points, and right now Texas is doing that. Now, Georgia's scoring 33 and a half, but you haven't seen maybe that dominant performance since the Clemson game. The Alabama loss obviously kind of rattled them a little bit. They're trying to rediscover their identity, but this is still a very good football team, and I expect this game to be a really fun and entertaining game. That shouldn't be an exception just because Georgia's having a little bit of trouble in some games. They're still a very good football team, and I expect them to give Texas plenty of issues in this game as well. Plenty of things for Texas to have to adapt to and find a counter to. Now, when you look at the burning questions for each team, for Georgia, it's going to be how do you shake off the slump? I don't even call it really a slump, but you just haven't been as dominant as you probably expected to be up until this point. And maybe that speaks to the parity of college football right now, or maybe that is just Georgia is trying to figure some things out. Obviously, there's a lot going on with the Georgia program. The off-field issues is one thing, but I think on the field too, you're trying to figure out who's going to be some of your leaders at certain positions. The wide receiver position has kind of been all over the place, though they have some players that should step up as the season progresses. We've seen some of them make some plays, but I think right now they're just not as dominant as they once were. And there's also a mental component to that. When you look at when Georgia comes into the season, they are expecting to compete for a national championship. And when things don't go quite to plan, specifically the Alabama game, you are looking at even the Kentucky game. That was a game in which no one expected it to be close, and Georgia barely beat Kentucky. Now, obviously, they won. We don't have to dive into what went wrong, but that does something to a team mentally when you are expected to dominate, and a team like Kentucky, who just lost to Vanderbilt, keeps it close with you. That's the tough part. I think that's the tough part to overcome mentally is that you have that game, you lose to Alabama, and now all of a sudden you maybe have some doubt creeping into your heads. Now it's Georgia. Kirby Smart, I trust, is going to get this ship figured out and he's going to get it corrected. He's going to get this team back where they need to be. But at the same time, there's also a mental component that they need to remember that they have the talent, they have the ability. It's just a matter of putting it together on the field. And they're facing a Texas team that has their quarterback back. They also have a team that's playing with a ton of confidence. So again, the mental component of football, I think gets kind of overlooked for a lot of different reasons, but there's a lot of things that go into it. When you're playing with confidence, you make better plays. You're not thinking as much. You don't overthink things. Texas is kind of in that boat right now, even with Quinn Ewers being out for a couple games. They don't seem to have skipped a beat. They absolutely dominated Oklahoma, and now they are looking to do the same against Georgia. The question for Texas is, can you run the ball effectively again? Question for Texas this entire year is, what is the rushing attack going to look like? You obviously know that losing CJ Baxter was going to hurt. The rushing attack in general has just taken a big hit before the season even began. So you knew that they were going to have to figure out how to run the ball effectively. Jaden Blue was expected to be that guy, but we've seen some other players step up so far this year. The matchup that I'm ready to watch is Georgia's defensive backs against Texas wide receivers. The reason why this is my matchup to watch, and when you look at the Alabama game, Ryan Williams gave Georgia's defensive backs an absolute nightmare of a game. He was torching them left and right, and Alabama really took it to them through the air. And that's something that you have plenty of talent, and maybe there are some questions about the experience because I don't think the talent is the question. I think that the ability for well, I'll say this. When are expecting freshmen to step up right away and compete at a high level, a lot of times you just kind of get in that routine of, okay, well, this is just, it's an assumption. This is going to happen. Sometimes these freshmen just aren't ready to play right away. They maybe, or at least they're not ready to be that elite player right off the bat. And I think Georgia is going through some of that right now. They're experiencing some freshman pains, some growing pains, and it's going to take some time. And Alabama's wide receivers gave them a hard time. Texas wide receivers, in my opinion, are better than Alabama's wide receivers outside of maybe Ryan Williams. I think Ryan Williams is probably the exception to that. But you have a former Alabama wide receiver in Isaiah Bond that could make life very miserable for this Georgia defensive secondary. So we'll keep an eye on that. That's a matchup definitely to watch. Could dictate how this game plays out. And it'll be fun to see how Georgia can respond. Texas is a 3.5 point favorite. I think that that is very fitting for how these two teams have played so far, and also tells you that Georgia is still very much a threat to win this game. I don't think there should be any doubt about that. There shouldn't be any overreactions. This is exactly where this line, I think, needs to be. We'll see how it moves one way or another. The impact players for Texas. Quinn Ewers is obviously going to be the big impact player for this team. His health obviously has been a source of conversation so far, but I think that he is back and he is ready to go. Looks pretty solid against Oklahoma. They didn't ask him to do a ton because they really didn't need him to. The rushing attack is obviously going to be the focus for this team. Running the football against Georgia will be difficult, but you have an offensive line at Texas that expects to be one of the best in college football, and you expect them to do exactly what they need to do, which is dominate at the line of scrimmage. And you should expect them to, that's their goal. That is their goal, to dominate Georgia and get this rushing attack where it needs to go. Contrevian Wisner had a huge game last week. He has been a surprise so far for a team that, again, is looking for someone to step up in CJ Baxter's absence. Jaden Blue has had his moments as well. So you've had two guys that have stepped up, and there's a reason why you recruit at such a high level at Texas is because you never know when you're going to call on that depth. You never know when you're going to need those guys, and that's really exciting. Wide receivers, obviously, we talked about them. Isaiah Bond, absolute burner at wide receiver. Matthew Golden could play a big role as well. You have a number of players on Texas that could make a big time impact through the passing attack. Gunnar Helmet, tight end. Ryan Wingo has stepped up. Speaking of freshmen that are taking on a bigger role, DeAndre Moore has played pretty well. Jonte Cook could be a factor as well. You have lots of options if you are the Texas Longhorns. Now, you also have had some defensive players that have stepped up. Anthony Hill Jr. has taken the step that they needed him to take. He is playing really good football right now, and he is playing really well for a defense that has needed him to. And that's exactly what you thought when you were getting him. He has been everything that they wanted and probably then some. Same thing with Colin Simmons. I don't think you expected him to play such a prominent role this early in the season, but you're getting it, and he is living up to those expectations. You had a lot of hype for the freshmen. And again, freshmen, we talked about them. Some players are ready for it, some players just need some time. And right now, it feels like Texas has two guys that are ready for the moment. Part of that might be also that they have guys around them that allow them to move at their pace and maybe face some easier matchups. But that being said, there's still plenty of talent for the Texas Longhorns, regardless of that. Georgia has plenty of impact players as well, and these are guys that can make a big time impact. All of it starts with Carson Beck. That shouldn't be a surprise. He is the leader of this offense. Hasn't looked as good, I think, as a lot of people expected him to, but at the same time, this is a guy with all the talent in the world to make life miserable for Texas's defense. Now, this will be one of the best teams that Texas face all year, and Beck is going to show exactly why. He is going to give them a tough time, and Texas is going to have to find ways to send unique pressures to get him a little bit rattled, get him off his game. We will see if they can do that, but you're still feeling pretty good if you're Georgia, regardless of what Texas sends your way. You just have to, again, the mental component, but also finding ways to gel with your guys. And I think we've seen flashes of that. Trevor Etienne has looked better as of late. I think that was one thing that we were concerned about coming into the season. How would he gel with this team? Could he make a big time impact? You've had the talent, but lately he's been obviously stepping up and answering those questions a little bit more. Arian Smith has been really fun to watch for Georgia. Now, the drops have been a concern at times, but he is also a big time problem in terms of his speed. He is one of the fastest players in college football, and stopping him for a lot of teams has been easier said than done. Now, we talked about the secondary. Malachi Starks, Dalen Everett, and more. Those guys are going to have their hands full, especially against the Texas offense where Steve Sarkisian is calling plays. You will have your hands full against the speed of Isaiah Bond. You have all those other players we mentioned earlier for Texas. Those are guys that are going to give you plenty of trouble, and you have to find ways to slow them down. It's going to be a difficult matchup, but also there's a reason why you were recruited to Georgia. We don't all of a sudden just lose our faith in the talent because the talent is there. It's just a matter of Kirby Smart getting them into good positions, Glenn Schumann getting them in good positions, and then also realizing that, hey, you're a 4 or 5 star kid. You should be just fine talent wise. It's not like Texas is this juggernaut that you're not ready for. I think Georgia just needs to realize or remember that they are Georgia, and that can mean a lot of things. You're not going to take it just based on that, but you also know that you have the talent to win this football game. Now, that being said, Texas is a 3.5 point favorite. There's a reason why they are favored in this game. So far, they look like the better team, but don't be surprised if Georgia wins this game. I'm not saying they're going to, but I'm saying don't be surprised if that happens because this has been a weird year in college football. This has been a year in which Vanderbilt beat Alabama, the same Alabama team that beat Georgia. Kentucky has been a team that beat Ole Miss. They gave Georgia a tough time. And granted, this is not a some huge 3.5 point line is not a huge line, but saying that Texas is going to win like it's a sure thing isn't a sure thing. This has been a weird year. I think that's what makes this game so intriguing. You have two teams that have plenty of talent and are incredible teams, and you combine that with a year in which nothing is really going to plan for most teams. A lot of teams have stepped up and surprised us. This could be another one. So it's going to be a fun game. It's going to be super entertaining, and I'm excited to see if Georgia can find a way to bounce back or if Texas just continues on this impressive run.